Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed that what you wear has the power to change how you feel? Project Endure apparel is designed to remind you that easy won't make you stronger, and that growth is an uncomfortable choice that we all have the privilege to make every day. Look good, feel good, and perform good. Head to the link in the show notes to shop Project Endure apparel and keep on doing hard things. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 93. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have a very, very, very special guest down in Texas, Mitch Ammons. Mitch, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. And we were just talking before we hit record that I am currently sick. You've got a little tickle in the back of your throat, so hopefully you don't catch whatever I have through the microphone.
Yeah.
But for people who don't know who you are, I'd just like for you to maybe introduce yourself however you see fit.
Yeah. Mitch Ammons. I go by Mitch. I live here in Austin, Texas. I am a semi-professional distance runner. I am also in real estate, and I started running 5 years ago, and just last December I qualified for the Olympic marathon team trials. That's basically all there is to Mitch.
Well, let me ask you this. You said semi-professional runner. What is
Uh-huh.
that? What does that look like from a day-to-day standpoint?
So I get paid to run, but it's not like a livable salary. So technically it's professional, but I'm no Kipchoge or anything. Really, I'm no Jared Ward. How about that?
That's fair. So you got into running 5 years ago, and in those 5 years, you've gotten fast enough to make it to the point where you are getting paid to run, and you are now going to the Olympic qualifiers. That's correct?
That's correct, yeah.
What was the journey like to running? So how did you find running? And then what were the last 5 years like that you got so fast?
Sure, yeah. Um, so the journey, almost 8 years ago, I got sober. I was a heroin and crystal meth cocaine user for about a decade until well, not quite. Um, when I was 18, I started using heroin heavily. And I guess I quit when I was 25. But before that, it was other drugs. So I got sober in 2015, and I I had been sober 2 years, and I had kind of started, doing this transformation, starting with internal self, emotional self, and from there, I grew comfortable with being in my own skin. I was able to handle life day to day, because that's why I used drugs, was because I was not equipped to handle life on my own, to handle emotions. Um, so I was about 2 years in, and the big piece missing was like physical health. I was sober, and yes, I was probably way better off than I was the prior 2 years, because I was using all these hard drugs, but I was not by any means a good, productive member of society, nor was I healthy by any means. I was a fast food cheeseburger eater. On most days, I drank Dr. Pepper like it was water. That was my hydration. And so about 2 years in, I decided I wanted to, and this is kind of funny. And I've said this in when anyone asks this question. I was single, and I wanted a fit girlfriend. I wanted a girl who was fit and looked good and liked to exercise. And my friends were like, well, you're never gonna find that when you are like you are. And from there it was like, you know what, you're right. I need to, it was kind of sort of thing of like, you change your friends, family, your what did they tell me? Your play friends, your play place, and your playground, or something like
Mm.
that. You got to change it all. It's you change yourself, you got to change everything, because it's just going to take you back to the old habits. But yeah, I started I was walking my dogs one day and I saw this boot camp going on, and I stopped. I was smoking. I was a pack a day smoker, and I was like, "What's going on over here?" And they're like, "We're just doing this little boot camp. You should come join us." So the next day I showed up. I put cigarettes down for, since then I still use, I was still using chewing tobacco, but I never smoked again.
Mm.
Um, and from there I did that for about 6 months to a year. And from there I was like, you know what? I had always had, I ran track in middle school and high school, and I was decent. I was decent for the amount of time and effort that I put into it. So in the back of my head, through my whole story, I had it in my head that if I ever can stay sober for any significant amount of time, I would love to be a runner, because I thought I had a little talent, and I know I enjoyed it, and I enjoy competing. And so after I'd been doing that boot camp for a little while, I was like, and this was an outrageously crazy idea. I was like, I want to run a 5 minute mile. I had run one in eighth grade. I ran 5 minute 4:58 in the eighth grade, and then I ran 4:54 my junior, or 4:51 my junior year of high school. And then that was it. Like, I never really got any better than that. And but even back then, that wasn't great. It was pretty mediocre. Um, but I knew I had some sort of talent, because I did run that without barely any trying, because my focus was on like external girls and drugs and alcohol. Um, but yeah, so I set out and I was like, I'm gonna go run this 5 minute mile. It took me like a year, but I started running. I would run from my house. I'd run half a mile out, half a mile back. That was my run, and then next week I'd start adding a couple more miles, and then it was December five. So December 5 years and 3 months ago, I joined a running group, and from there, I just fell in love with it. I joined this running group. I met the coach of that running group is a dear friend of mine and one of my biggest supporters ever. His name's Gilbert. Um, I've met through running. I've met my fiance, and we're getting married here in almost exactly a month. I met her through running. I even found my career, my real estate career, through fellow runners.
Mm.
But I ran a marathon. I ran my first 10K. It's actually not this weekend, but the weekend after is the anniversary of that. I'll be running that 10K again. But I ran a 10K, and then I ran a half marathon in June, and then that December I ran my first marathon. So it was really it was a December, January that I started running 5 years ago. So it's very close to now. But yeah, I think that answered the question. That was kind of what led to it.
Yeah, that's crazy. And it leaves a lot to unpack. And so I'll ask you the first question that I ask everybody. And I'm curious where you'll go with this, but what's the hardest thing in life that you didn't necessarily choose for yourself? So a circumstance that almost chose you that you had to handle. What would you say that is for you?
So this is a pretty controversial topic, but I'll just say what I believe. I believe addiction is genetic. I believe it is for lack of a better word, a disease. Because I didn't really choose. I chose to use the drugs, yes, but I didn't choose to get as addicted as I did. And from what I have heard from psychiatrists and psychologists and people who study addiction, is that once those chemicals are in my brain, the part of my brain that tells me that I need to eat, that I need to drink water, that I need to breathe, what's added to that is I need to use these drugs. And I do believe that, because I tried to, and I'm not a weak-willed person, but I tried to will my way out of that addiction for years,
Yeah.
and I couldn't. Every single attempt ended with failure. And I'm talking attempt after attempt. I went to rehab 6 times, in and out of jail, all sorts of consequences, crashed cars, and nothing. My family telling me, which was probably the worst consequence, was my family saying, like, look, we love you, but you need to stay away from us, because we can't help you and you're hurting us. You're killing us on the inside. My best friends told me, I love you, dude, but I cannot have you around because you're going to either get me in trouble or I'm going to find you dead. And that was a huge consequence. It really, really hurt, but it wasn't enough to make me stop. And I wanted to stop. I never wanted to keep going. Um, it would just take over that part of my brain. I guess you could call it a craving. It's like, I have to have this. So that would I say is a struggle I didn't necessarily choose, at least to the extent that I took it to. I will completely admit, yes, I chose to use the drugs. I wanted to have fun. I wanted to be the bad boy. I wanted to get along with these guys that I looked up to, the older guys that were the bad boys of high school. I definitely chose that, but I did not choose to get addicted and stuck in the hole that I was in for like almost a decade.
Yeah. I mean, I got the chills when you shared that your family and friends essentially said, "Hey, we want to help, but clearly you're not changing, so maybe stay away from us for now."
Yeah,
And if that didn't
right.
make you change, like, was there ever a point of hopelessness where you thought, "Well, if that's not going to make me change, I don't know what will."
I hear people talk about this rock bottom. I had a rock bottom and then I'd pull out a shovel and keep digging. The bottom was infinite. However long and however deep I wanted to go, I'd get there. And it was just as miserable every single time. What was the question here?
I just were there ever points where you thought,
Yeah,
well, if I'm not going to change now, will I ever change?
sure. Um, so like I said, the consequences, that's not what made me get sober. When I went to treatment the most recent time, I didn't want to get sober.
Hmm.
I was going through the motions like I had done 5 times previously. This time the only difference was like, hey, I'm gonna do what they say with everything I have so that when I fail, I can say, look, I actually tried and it didn't work. My plan going into treatment, and this is every single time. This is every time I would dry out and either I'd run out of money or I'd be so sick that I just was like, I have to have a detox, or I can't go 2 hours without having a fix because I'm I'm projectile vomiting, dry heaving, cold chills. Just it's like the flu,
Yeah.
except it's a symptom of withdrawal. Um, but yeah, I never really had that. I had moments of clarity or larger consequences that I was like, man, I got to do this, but it's so fleeting. The next day, I'm like, yeah, I'll worry about it later. I'll get sober next week. And even times when I would I've been to jail a good amount of times, and I think the longest was like 3 days. Um, and that's a serious bottom because I'm like, I am in jail. There's a murderer next to me who's going up to talk to the judge, getting charged with murder. Like, what am I doing here? I'm a kid. I have a drug using problem, and I'm sitting here next to a murderer. Like, I never hurt anybody. I just used drugs. With that being said, I definitely hurt people. I hurt my friends, my family. I definitely hurt people. So I don't want people to think that I am not admitting that. I definitely hurt people, but I'm never murdered anyone. Um, so what I'm getting at is there was no specific time or consequence or feeling or action towards me from my family or friends that made me say, okay, now I'm going to get sober. And because I said it a million times, every time something happens, like, okay, I'm getting sober. And then a day later, I'm like, I'll get sober next week or something.
Yeah. And so now that it's been some time since you've been sober, it sounds like you had a lot of relationships that were affected throughout your time using drugs. Have you found that it's been challenging to mend those relationships in the time you've been sober?
Um, I've got to say no. Every single person who had cut me out were my true friends were the ones that cut me out of their life. They
Hmm.
were my true friends, and as soon as they saw that I was sober and working on myself and trying to better myself, they were right back here supporting me. Same with my family. The ones that didn't come back were the ones who were my I guess you could call them using buddies, or and not using as like we used drugs together, but at the end of the day, I wanted something they had, and they wanted something I had, which was access to the drug dealer or the money or whatever it was. They were we were it was a business agreement. We'll hang out, but I want your connections and vice versa. Those people didn't come back, but that was great because it was a big temptation when I would be back in contact with them after trying to get sober. It was, but I should have been able to do better. But it is what it is. So
Yeah. Is there anything you would go back in time and tell your younger self in the midst of that? Or is there even anything you could tell your younger self that would have changed things?
So that's a really good question. I'm gonna kind of follow that up with, do I regret the whole thing? Um, First of all, there was nothing I or anybody could have told me then. Like, hey, they could have literally told me my future. Hey, I am a mind reader. I am a future teller, and I'm telling you that if you do this and this and this, you're gonna relapse. You're gonna go back out. It's gonna suck. And I would say, no, you're wrong. I will be able to either stay sober or I will be able to control it this time. Every single time. There was nothing anybody, because there were people who were not telling me my future, but they were telling me their past, which was identical to my future. And I wouldn't listen to them. I had no regard for anything they had to say because I was right. I was the person who knew myself. And as a matter of fact, they were completely right every single time. So even me telling myself then would have done absolutely nothing. And kind of what I brought up was, do I regret it? And I wonder this a lot. Do I regret getting into it? Because maybe I could have run in college and maybe I would be competing for a spot 1, 2, 3 at the Olympics. Like, who knows? But I genuinely believe that I am not who I am today without the struggles that I went through. Um, and it gives me a whole different mentality or outlook on life because nothing will ever be as bad as it was. Aside from like a close friend or family member dying, there's absolutely nothing that can compare to how awful it was. And even then, like, I am equipped with the tools and the emotional maturity to know that when somebody does die close to me or something awful happens, that it's still okay. I can get through it. It's going to be sad. It's going to suck. And this goes for literally life, anything in life, and not just me. This is something that anyone can kind of live by, is that like, it's going to be okay. You're going to be sad for a while. Things might suck, but in the end, you're going to be fine. And that is how I've kind of lived life since getting sober, and it has worked out greatly. I'll just bring this up really quick because I think it's important. My biggest fear in sobriety was losing a parent. And my dad died almost 2 years ago. And, it was sad. Sure. Yeah, it was definitely sad. But at the end of the day, I was there for my family. I was there for my mom. I was the man um, taking care of his family. And to be able to do that and also let him die knowing I'm okay. He doesn't have to worry. He died knowing he does not have to worry about me anymore. He doesn't have to worry about my mom, because that was a huge um, point of contention. Was my mom would take my side, my dad would be furious at both of us. She just wanted to protect me. He just wanted to punish me. Of course, we completely smoothed that over once I finally got sober. But it's just very good feeling knowing that he could go and he was at peace knowing that we were both okay, that I was okay, and I could be there to take care of the rest of the family. So that was good.
That has to bring you a lot of peace, I'm sure, as well,
Yeah,
to know.
man,
Yeah.
it really does, because one, they were so worried about me all the time, and they have done so much for me. They have been my biggest supporters my whole life. Really, anything I wanted or needed, I had. They were just the greatest parents ever. And to know that he could go peacefully and not worry is very, very comforting to me.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about all of that reminds me of episode 58 of this podcast with Kellen Matthews, who also is recovering from addiction and specifically heroin addiction.
Yeah.
And he is now in the world of ultra running.
Yeah. I
And
know. I think I know who he is.
yeah, and it's funny because on the podcast and off the podcast, I've spoken to so many people who have went from one addiction to running, and I'm curious if you see running as an addiction in your life, a positive addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It's positive until it's not. So I have to be careful. But you better believe it. It had okay, so I early on when people would ask this question, do I think running keeps me sober? Do I think running saved my life? Do I think running keeps me sober? And I used to say, no, it doesn't. It has definitely changed my life in a positive way, but that's not what keeps me sober. Um, I have now come to realize that running definitely keeps me sober.
Mm.
It is another addiction. It really is, and I am obsessed. Um, and I have to be careful because sometimes those miles keep stacking up, and I'm obsessed with it, and I just keep going because I'm obsessed with that number. I'm obsessed with the hitting that pace, and it can be it to my detriment. It hasn't yet. It hasn't gone there. I've been able to pull back every time I start to kind of walk that line. But yeah, it 100%. This is an addiction, and it is a healthy addiction until it's not. Which I watch very closely because that would just. I'm not going to say it would shatter me, but it would take some getting used to if I were to get injured and be out for a few months. Luckily, I do have another outlet of fitness, and that's cycling. My fiance is a big cyclist, and I've really grown to like it. So I do have that as a backup. And from there, I also kind of joke around, but not really joking, is that like when I'm done running, I want to do CrossFit. I want to be like lean and jacked and be able to do muscle ups and so one day, but it kind of it's nice to have that in the back of my head that if something does happen, I get
Yeah.
injured, I have other outlets.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to talk about running, but before we get there, I just to put a bow on the whole what's the hardest thing that's ever chosen you conversation. Are in what ways, if any, are you better off because of what you went through addiction?
Yeah. I kind of talked about my outlook on life. But there's so much more than that. And I'm gonna go ahead and put this on running and training, is that it has taught me literally everything in life. It's taught me to be patient. It's taught me to work very, very hard for something that's not going to give me instant gratification. The training I'm doing now is not going to pay off until 6 months down the road, maybe even a year. Um, it has taught me not even if I'm not motivated, I can still get out of bed and do it. I'm rarely motivated. Sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm like, I'm ready. Let's do this. I love it. But I tell you, 90% of the time, it's dang near a chore to get out of bed in the morning and go hit the pavement. But I do it anyway. I do it anyway, and I do it every day. No matter what. If it's pouring down rain, if it's freezing cold, I'm out there. And well, really here when it's really hot, and that's actually the worst of all of them. But I'm out there every morning. I'm putting miles in. I'm doing big workouts. I'm hitting the gym because I do know how important this is in my recovery and in my life. I think another big one is that so I'll take like a week or two off of running after a big race and a big training block. And man, it's like if I don't wake up at, 4:45 a.m. and I'm out the house and running the streets by 6 o'clock, it's like that gets my day going. It's like jump starts it. I'm ready to go. I finish my run at 7:15 or 7:30. I get a coffee. I go get ready for work, and I hit the ground running. When I don't do that, it's like waking up early and like not doing that routine. I'm like completely lost, and my whole day is almost thrown off. I was about to say my whole day is ruined. It's not ruined. My whole day is thrown off. From not being able to do those things. And so I do think it plays a big part in that.
Yeah, routine and structure are so
Routine
important,
and structure, yeah.
and especially when such a big part of who you are and what you do revolves around running in this season of life. When you don't get to do that on any given day, I can only imagine how much that throws you off.
Yeah, it does.
Now, with that being said, I'm curious in your mind, what is the hardest thing that you've ever chosen to do on purpose, and why have you chosen to do that thing?
I mean, that's easy. Run a marathon.
Just a
Uh,
marathon?
well, I don't know if it's just running a marathon because I could go out and run 26.2 miles right now and it'd be fine. Uh, it, Choosing to race and really, really dig deep and push myself is probably, aside from getting sober, the hardest thing I've ever done. That last 10K, that last 10 kilometers of a marathon is awful. I am like, I have, my legs are just like bricks, and I'm just struggling to just drive my knee forward and pump my arms to keep my body moving. This most recent marathon I ran, I had about 6 miles to go, and I was like, I'm falling apart. This is the end. I'm falling apart. And because I don't really have, like, I feel like I'm like flailing through the air. I don't really have control over my legs and my arms. But I look down at my watch and I'm cruising way below marathon pace. So I'm like, well, I guess I'm okay. But it doesn't feel good, but I'm still moving fast. So that's all that matters. And I just keep pushing along, and it's hard, man. I don't think it's any harder for me than anyone else. So there's thousands and thousands of people who do the same thing. It's very, very hard, and it really hurts. If you can get out there and push yourself, that hurts bad. But in the back of my mind, I know as soon as I cross that finish line, it's over. I can stop, I can drink water, I can lay on the ground if I want to, and it all goes away. So that's what gets me through it. But yeah, that's probably one of the harder things I've ever chosen to do is training is not necessarily as hard as the actual race, but training is hard. I mean, maybe not as physically hard, but being consistent and just doing the work every single day. Who wants to do that? I mean, it kind of sucks, but um, it's gotten me. It's changed my life. It keeps me sober, and it's um, man. I honestly the outlets that I have received from this sport are infinite as well. I mean, my friends, all of my closest friends, aside from like a couple that were my friends forever, are all from running. Like I said, my fiance, my career, myself. I credit running to who I am today because it really has just changed everything.
Mm. Now, a lot of people listening to this podcast run. Some people listening to this podcast have run marathons, but I think very few people listening to this podcast or in general compete at the marathon. I'm curious for you, why did you choose to compete and get real competitive in the marathon distance? And also, what is different when you're racing a race versus just running a race?
Okay, so let me start with why I chose. And I didn't really I didn't when I started this whole thing, I thought I was going to be the guy who completed marathons, completing the distance. That was my full expectation when I went into it to run a marathon. When I started training, I was like, I just want to run the distance. My first marathon, I ran 2:36, which is it's it's decently fast for a first time marathon. Um, I did it with decent amount of training, but there's no way to just come out of nowhere and do, every training block builds on the previous training block. But I definitely got a taste of it. I've always been competitive, and I enjoy competition. So I played team sports growing up. I played football, baseball. I didn't really play basketball because I was just horrible, but mostly football. And team sports, it's a team thing. So you have other people to credit and other people to blame. And, it's you can play the blame game. Well, we didn't win. Well, because this guy or what. This is a sport where if I don't win, it's because of me. If I do poorly, it's because of me. It's all, if I do great, it's because of me and my coach and stuff like that. There's just some sort of satisfaction out of, and I started winning a couple races every now and then, and that is awesome. But before that, it was a race against myself previously. Like, it was always a race against to better myself. And there is this like extreme satisfaction, gratification of setting a goal and getting to it. And I've set some pretty outrageous goals, and this last year, my ultimate goal in running was to run a 2:16 marathon and a 1:04 half marathon. I have since reached those in December and January. And now and then for a little while, I was like, well, what's next? Because I hit my goals. And those were the goals. Those were the like shoot for the moon goals. Like, that was like in my head, probably never going to happen, but why not? Got to have something to work for. So I've set new goals, and I'm going to just kind of inch along and try and get to them. And kind of go from there, and whatever happens after happens. And I know you had a second part of that question. And I don't remember what it was.
What is the difference between running a race and then racing a race for you?
Okay. I've never run a race not competing. One time I did, and it wasn't very fun. I ran with somebody else in the Las Vegas half marathon. It was fun to be there for them, because I was helping pace. But man, I like to race. It's almost, like I said, I don't love running. I love competing. I don't my morning easy runs are 100% a chore. The only reason I do it is because I hang out with friends while I run. It's like our happy hour, for lack of a better word. We are out there chatting it up, talking about what's been going on, the drama, the gossip, whatever. That's fun for me. I love hanging out with my friends. But when I have to go run by myself, when I have to go out and run 10 miles easy by myself, it is miserable. I hate it. I'm there. I listen to music, but it doesn't help all that much. So with that being said, I love workouts, and I love competition, and I love racing. I don't really love running. It's not like, oh, I just want to go run to clear my head. I don't really get that. I wish I did, because I know a lot of people do. They're like, there's nothing better than going on a run alone and just clearing my head. And I'm like, I don't get that. I'd rather go watch TV or something, clear my head that way.
I love that distinction between the love of running by itself versus the love of competing / racing. I think that's almost a deeper, more solid place to put your identity as is a competitor as opposed to a runner. Because like you alluded to earlier, right, there could come a point in time where you might not be able to run like you can run now, and you have these backups, you have these other outlets, but you can always be a competitor no matter what you do.
Yeah. And like you said, you can always be a competitor. You're not necessarily competing against others. You're competing against yourself. You're competing against the last race you did. There's 100 ways to look at it, and all can be gratifying, I guess.
Now, I'm curious. So, last 6 miles of a marathon, legs are feeling heavy. You're just flailing all over the place. It's easy to go into a race with a game plan and to say, hey, when things get hard, I'm going to tell myself X, Y, and Z. I'm going to stay positive. I'm going to whatever. What goes through your mind realistically the last 6 miles of a real tough race? Like, what are you saying to yourself?
So I have run through every single scenario of the race 1,000 times before the race. However, the one out of the 1,000 that I didn't go over in my head is what usually happens. I try and prepare for every single race, but it usually does me no good. But I do have, so I'll that last 6 miles is just expected. I know it's going to be awful. The last eighth of any race or whatever, the last little bit of any race is horrible. I'm prepared for that. I know that I experience it in workouts. I run my workouts really hard, which is kind of not frowned upon, but it's discouraged because it can beat your body up too much. But I don't know why I do it, and it seems to work. But I almost finish most workouts like it's a race, because I just feel like I get more reward when I'm finished and I'm so tired and my body is aching. I feel like it's kind of sick, but it's like if I'm not like so sore. I just feel like I didn't go hard enough, which is a flaw. It's not helpful, but it has helped me to know that, like, as bad as something hurts, I can keep going. But you talked about, like, what am I saying to myself? Um, I heard from a guy on on a track and field Instagram account, and he told me, or he said in this on this clip that it does. He has shown up to races late and not had to have a chance to warm up. He has had a flight that was delayed and got in at 4 or 5 a.m. and went straight to his hotel, changed into his race kit, and went to the starting line. He's things don't go as planned is what his point was. And he shows up on that starting line, and everything that didn't go as planned doesn't matter because he's done the work. He's done the work for the last 6 months or whatever it is, and he's ready. So when I line up on that starting line, I'd say 95% of the time, I feel awful the day of. I feel awful the day before. My legs are heavy. I'm in my head. I'm like, why do I feel so horrible? I've tapered. I've done everything. What I've realized is it doesn't matter. I'm actually more suspicious if I feel good before a race because I'm like, this can't be good because I've never felt good before a race. When I feel awful, I'm just like, whatever. This is just how it goes. It happens all the time. It doesn't matter. I've done the work. I'm going to show up and perform on race day, no matter what the circumstances. So kind of going back to your question, it's like I in that last 6 miles, I'm like, I know I can do this. I'm fit. I've done the workouts that indicate that I can run this time. I can keep going. And I've gotten pretty decent at being relatively miserable for long periods of time in running long races. So that's really, I also just tell myself, as soon as I cross that finish line, it's over. You know, it really, it's like that. And I stop and I'm like, oh, I feel okay now.
I think what you said there about being able to embrace that suffering, so to speak, for the last 6 miles or whatever portion of the race, you can do it because you've been there before. And I think there's an element of confidence to that, right? You're confident that you can handle it because you've showed up and you've done that kind of thing before. You've pushed your body to the limits before. And I think no matter where anybody is and what anybody does listening to this podcast, you can build that same confidence in any area of life by showing up and doing those hard things, because the next time things get hard, you've been there before. So I appreciate that insight.
That is 100% a true statement. That was very well put.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Really-
So we're talking about endurance, right? We're talking about marathons, running, etc. When you hear the word endurance, what comes to mind for you? What is your definition of endurance?
A very simple definition is just I can sustain a running pace for a long time. I don't think that's actually the technical definition at all. Probably has something to do with cardiovascular fitness, but when I think of someone that has endurance, they can they can put strain on their body for long periods of time. That's really, I actually don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, the beautiful part is there's no answer that I have or that I'm looking for. And really, I think endurance can mean so many different things to so many different people. And I think the coolest part about it is that endurance doesn't just have to apply to running or racing or fitness. It can apply to all areas of life. And even through your story of addiction, right? There's endurance there because there are so many points in that story where you probably could have just thrown up your hands and said, I'm not even going to try to go to rehab again. I'm done with this, but you showed up again. Right.
Yeah. As you were saying it, endurance over and over, I was like, oh, it just hit me. It's like, you're able to endure uncomfortableness for a while. Maybe that's it.
Yeah, I love that. So before we head toward the final question, I do want to touch on real estate because, right, we talked a lot about your life as a runner, as a competitor, but you also have a job outside of all of that. And I would imagine that being in the world of real estate, especially starting up in the world of real estate, is not the easiest thing in the world. What's that journey been like for you?
That's really funny that you ask this because let me answer your question though. No, it's not easy. It is a career path that takes a long time to get going. I knew that going into it, and I said to myself, "Well, all I have is patience and time." I'm relatively young. I'm 33. I know the baby boomers already had their wife, children, and picket fence already. But in this day and age, it's like mid to late 30s, you're still getting things figured out, in my opinion. I love the career. I love every day of doing it. It's so much fun meeting new people, kind of being able to make my schedule, but it was a lot to get used to because I'm not the most organized person. And this is a job that you need to be very, very organized or things will get lost. But I was literally on a run this morning with a friend and I'm like, this is in my exact statement. I said, look, why is it that I can go and run 10 miles every single morning, 10 miles minimum every single morning without question? I hate it, but I do it anyway. And I cannot go to my office and make phone calls for 3 hours. I cannot get myself to do it. And it's the same thing. It's like what I'm doing now will pay off down the road. Same with real estate. The work I'm doing now, it's a 90-day cycle, sales cycle. Everything I'm doing now won't pay off until 90 days down the road. I won't get paid for what I'm doing and maybe even longer, 3 to 6 months. And that's okay because I know it and I know it works out if I do the work. But sometimes I just cannot get myself to do it. And I wonder, why can I get myself to go run every morning? And the payoff is 6 months down the road when I go race, because that's the payoff. That's the reward is running the race. And I can't get myself to go make calls for 3 hours because I make a lot of cold calls because that's what new realtors do. When I know that making these calls is going to get me paid a lot of money in 3 to 6 months, but I still struggle with it. So I'm working on that. But that's funny that you asked that because I was literally talking about it this morning.
That is an interesting question. I almost wonder if are you less motivated by money than you are kind of the spirit of competition?
Yeah, I am. It's funny because my girlfriend, now fiance, always talked about I'm wealthy with mental money. I have a lot of mental money. Every time I go do a great workout, cha-ching, cha-ching, I get all the mental money, but the money, not so much. But yeah, I think I'm a little more motivated now because I'm in a serious relationship. We're getting married. The responsibilities are kind of slowly adding up. I'm not just responsible for myself anymore. I'm not paying for a 500 square foot apartment for my dog and I. We've got a mortgage and we've got real life responsibilities. And I do it because I want to be there. I want to be able to be there and not support her, but like contribute for her. And so I'm changing my attitude. But before it was like I would work when I needed money. Otherwise, I wanted to just enjoy life. And I will say this, and this will be the last part of it. I I felt like I was robbed of my late teens and early adulthood. So from really like 16 until I got sober at 25, I had no fun experience, aside maybe a couple, but I didn't get to experience life. And so when I got sober, the first year was just, white knuckling it, just everything I can. I was a success at the end of the day if I did not pick up a drink or a drug. But, of course, we grow and that's not as much a success anymore because it's just who I am now. But yeah, I've worked on that a while. So my point is that like I wanted to experience life. I did a lot of traveling. I would work when I had to, and I would do the bare minimum because that was what I enjoyed. And that's what I feel like some people do that early adulthood. Like they just go have fun. And so I did that a little bit later in life. And now I'm 33 as is where I'm doing what some were doing at 25 or something. And I'm okay with it. I may never be a gajillionaire and that's fine with me. I do have an appreciation for life that is more important to me than any amount of money. But you make a good point there. I do value other things more than I do money. And that is probably why I can't get myself to go make these dang calls.
Which is fair. And I wish I remember who said this quote, but it goes, true wealth is who you would be if you lost everything.
Sure.
And yeah, I think wealth is so much more than money. And also to add on top of that, I think we live in a society that places a lot of value on, delayed gratification. You work, 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 and then you retire and you enjoy
Yeah.
life down the road. In reality, any of us could not have that. We could not be here tomorrow. And
Kick
so,
the bucket before you ever get to enjoy it. That's true.
yeah. So what is that balance, so to speak?
Exactly. The
Right.
balance is what we need. Yeah. There,
Yeah.
there extremes of either is bad. Extremes of anything is bad. It's the balance for sure. And I'm working on that.
Yeah. So, last question here, Mitch. There are people listening to this podcast struggling with all different kinds of things. Some of them are open about those struggles, some of them are keeping them inside. They all look and feel a little bit different. But right now, you have a chance to speak to those people who are hurting, who are struggling, who just don't know where to go or what to do next, and they're feeling a little bit lost. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because I do like to get this point across. I know that everybody has struggles that are as um, huge as mine were to them. Whether I would look at it and say, "Oh, that was nothing," but to them, it's what my struggles were to me. Everybody has that. Everyone has a hard time, hard days, things that make them feel bad about themselves, things that affect their self-esteem. And that's what fears is what it comes down to, is a fear, a fear of not being successful, fear of not succeeding, fear of losing someone, fear of being alone, whatever it is. It's all the same. So for me, it was, I mean, I was full of fear and I used drugs because then I had no fear. Um, but what I want, my advice, or what I would have to say, find something that you love. And I did say a lot of times in this podcast that I don't love running, but I do. I love it. It may be not in the moment, but I love it, and I do, and I wouldn't change anything. Find something that you love and find a community, because that was the biggest life changer for me, was having people who support me. And I sought people that were way better than me. I sought out people that I wanted to be like, because I've heard from 100 people that, like, surround yourself with the people you want to be like, and you'll be like them. If you surround yourself with people that are horrible, then you're going to be horrible. That's just how it goes. So find that community, find that thing that you love, and just keep going, because life will get better. There's nothing in this world that is too much for us to handle, especially together. And that goes for anyone struggling with addiction. Of course, reach out to me. Anyone who direct messages me about addiction, I answer as quickly as I can, because honestly, I don't get to keep with what I have unless I give it away. And whatever that looks like, whether it's an introduction into a 12-step program, or just, I looked at people early on. And this is a big reason of why I try and get my story out, is I looked at people early on that were worse, in my eyes, worse off than I was, and are now better off than I ever could imagine myself. And that was so not motivating, but inspiring. It was so inspiring to know that if they can do it, I can do it. And so, just use me as an example. I was a gutter heroin junkie, and now I'm doing okay. I'm not perfect by any means. I'm doing okay though. So if I can get through that, guys, y'all can get through what y'all are going through. But don't do it alone. You can't do it alone. You've got to have your friends and your family, your community, and find something that you love.
That's so well said. I'll add this quick anecdote. There's this research study, I want to say in the 60s or 70s, where they took this rat, they put it in a cage, and they gave it heroin laced water and regular water, and the rat would drink both, they taste both, and then just drink the heroin laced water until it died. And so the researchers basically came to the conclusion, like, hey, if given the choice, like, these animals, these rats will just kill themselves by overdosing because they're so addicted to it.
Yeah.
And then a researcher came along a few years later and said, well, hey, like, they were by themselves in a cage. So, like, can you blame them? They had nothing else to do. So they put them in a cage with all these toys and this amusement park. I believe they called it Rat Park. And so the rats would be in this amusement park with all these things to do, and they would still choose the heroin laced water until they died. And then the researchers said, well, wait a sec, the rat was by itself. Let's give it some friends. So they introduced some friends, and all of a sudden now the rat had no care for the heroin water because it had other rats to be in community with. And it sounds like in your life and in the lives of all of our lives, community is so important and so powerful. So just to drive home that last point, find people who you can be in community with, who are like-minded, who you want to be like, and who you want to do life with. It's so important.
Wow, that was awesome. I had not heard that, but I know that they do studies like that, and that's probably very real. But that's so interesting. I'm really glad you said that.
Yeah. Well, Mitch, if people want to follow along with your journey, if they want to reach out or just say thank you for this podcast, where's the best place for people to do that?
I'd just say Instagram. I have a Facebook and I have an Instagram. I'm at Mitch Ammons, Ammons, Mitch Ammons. It's easy because it's just my name.
I'll link that in the description so people can find it easily. And seriously, Mitch, just thank you again for sharing your story, for your time. And we're wishing the best of luck with all your future races. I'll be following along for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.